Thriving after trauma isn't just about healing the individual, it's about transforming the systems that shape their lives. Today on Mastering Change, Dr. Melita Stancil introduces Anthelum, her framework for helping people move from surviving to truly thriving by working with families, schools, workplaces, and communities as interconnected parts of the healing process. She explains why joy isn't superficial happiness, but a grounded, bittersweet awareness we have to practice, and how connection and permission to experience joy are vital parts of healing. Here's the conversation with Dr. Melita. Dr. Melita Stancil, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I am honored to be here and I'm looking forward to this experience.
Yes, super welcome. Okay, I have got a selection of Esther's cards, pink ones removed. It's a bit early in the day, I think, for most of them, for those. And I'm going to ask you one of these as a way of us just starting the conversation. Go from the intuition and the heart. They tend to be the best ones. When people overthink them, it can get detailed. So I'll never forget meeting ...
Oh, I will never forget meeting. I love this. Okay. I will never forget meeting the admissions officer to my son's boarding school because he decided that he wanted to go to boarding school. And I was a naysayer because we don't do that, Southern Black people. We have a very specific way that we matriculate. And I met her, and Dana Brown was a life changer. She was someone that taught me the system of understanding. It was, of course, one of the best schools in the world, and he had earned a scholarship. So, an amazing educational opportunity. But she was able to help me to learn what was needed in order to support him and how to navigate a system that was built for the 1%, which also led to my work eventually and learning how to navigate educational systems, day schools, boarding schools, etc. And then to be able to be successful at helping young adults and young people who went through a trauma, to be honest with you, and traditionally were disinvited from their environments, but not always welcome back. And so in my therapeutic frame of Anthelum, what we do is we're the bridge. So it helped me to be able to navigate both sides, the clinical world and also the educational world, where a lot of people don't have those opportunities.
Great answer. Okay, well, that's probably a nice way for us to connect into and did your son go? Sorry, actually, just before we move on, tell me a bit more.
Yeah, he did. He went to an amazing school and he also had his difficulties, but he was able to, this is where I started this work, wrapped around him and created a bridge. And he was able to successfully take some time off and go back, and he did an amazing job and he killed it and graduated in a great space. So there's, to be continued. It's been amazing watching his educational journey since then.
That sounds great. Yeah, great. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself in your own words, and then we'll dive straight into how you relate to the field.
Absolutely. My name is Dr. Melita Stancil. I'm the founder of Anthelum, which is a therapeutic framework which seeks to create a bridge between trauma and thriving.
Great, trauma and thriving. So talk to us about that framework then. What's the premise of the framework? Our listeners, some might be familiar with it, most might not. So start from majority of our audience are practicing therapists, but if you start from assume nothing. So and let's make sense of this for everybody.
Absolutely. So a lot of times what I notice is that individuals that walk into my office, at least early on, would walk in, usually I met them kind of at the worst moments of their life. They had been through something, or they had been through something and then gone to a different modalities of treatment. And then they were walking in because they just hadn't got where they wanted to get, right? They hadn't gotten back to life worth living, let's just call it, from a DBT framework. And so what I realized I was especially gifted and adept at doing was being able to integrate with the family system, with the educational system, with the Bronfenbrenner's meta levels of different types of ways to cross the systems that were impacting their lives. And it could be as small as let's paint the room yellow, or maybe this neighborhood is not a great fit for you, or maybe we need to transfer you to another, maybe a new job, right? Could be as small as that. But what I realized is that the intra and also the inter had a relationship that we don't often have the ability to impact. So for me, when a person walks in, what I realized is even if we're able to treat the trauma successfully, what we weren't necessarily being able to do in a way that I would say well is get them to a life that was where they were thriving. And when I say thriving, what I mean is experiencing joy. And so for me, joy is not the absence of bad, but it is actually honoring that most things are bittersweet and the ability to reflect in a moment that this is amazing, this part is not so great. And I am able to actually be mindful to the moment and then turn myself towards feeling positive emotions.
Mm. Dr. Stancil, there is so much to unpack there that has me, as I said, excited about this conversation because one word that you have consistently used is bridge, right? And if we are bridging a student between, like you mentioned, the intra and the inter, I would be so fascinated to hear how are you applying that in today's context when education systems, particularly higher education systems, are such shaky bridges. So can you walk our listeners through what is the current experience like of bridge building?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. I think that a lot of people right now are anxious for great reasons. Even the just the energy of the world right now, I would argue, has an anxiety to it, a charge to it. And so just like we feel it, young adults feel it as well. And so what I notice is that if I'm able to pull from my community, so I'm a clinical community psychologist. And so pulling from my community background is about getting to start meeting people where they are, so starting at gatekeepers in the educational systems, they may not have title power, but they have social power. So identifying individuals within the system that can actually change the narrative for young adults. So we don't always like to admit it, but within the system, there's a story that's being told about each of us, right? And so although as young adults matriculate, teachers aren't supposed to tell that story to the next teacher, but we're human, right? And so we talk. And we're curious and we ask questions. And so what I realize is if I'm able to anchor to a gatekeeper to help shape the narrative with some psychoeducation about what the individual may be experiencing and why they may be doing the things that they're doing, which are interpreted sometimes in a negative light, let's just say. What I'm able to help to create within the educational system is actually a soft landing place, a place that actually because they chose the student for a reason, and the students that are there are part of the community and they have gifts and talents to give into the community. Sometimes along the way, we forget about those things when those students start to go through difficult moments. And it's reminding them gently and softly, right, with a reverence for the power structure that exists that, hey, well, remember, Johnny actually is this amazing artist. Maybe we can tap into that in some type of way and kind of come full circle. And so then there's the logistical parts about, is the student actually meeting the markers that they need to meet and those things from an educational point of view. But I find it's usually like a social and emotional thing. And I found that the same as well with jobs. So a lot of times when individuals are struggling at work, the struggle is not necessarily the competency because you have the job, so you can do the job. Generally speaking, what it is I find that there's a lack of support from the social emotional point of view. And so when we move the marker from surviving or getting through the trauma to how do we build a life and what is necessary for you to actually thrive and experience joy, then it becomes a very different story. And I find that most people get on board. So what it really is creating a village. And it's kind of going back to where we were before with the organic connections that we used to form and in a lot of ways the commitment to each other that we used to have that now when things get really fast and in the world of social media all the things as wonderful as technology is we sometimes I think what we do is we lose kind of the human connection.
the human connection side of it is so relevant, so relevant. And I love that you expanded the conversation to not just the education aspect of it, but what it can matriculate into when we go into the job market. And so I guess my follow-up question really takes us in two directions. From the education standpoint, I think about for the gatekeepers around that student, what are some of the things they should pay attention to so they recognize, hey, this isn't just one of those things that I assume is going to sort itself out? And I guess in that regard, my first question would be, when would someone think, or when would someone be in the best position to utilize your services? What are all the preemptive things they should think about so they're not calling you in when it's already at the worst case scenario? Like, if you could tell them in advance, here's the best way to reach me before we get to ground zero. Here are the things to look for. And then when you finish that, I'll follow up with my second question, because I don't want our listeners to miss anything.
Wait, make your answer, because I heard lots of questions within the question.
No, right? That's why
Okay. Oh, I think when I speak to individuals, like if I go to a school and I speak to teachers, I would say I would say your therapist. So a lot of times, where I enter the picture is once a family has gone through several different types of intervention. I would love, like you just said, for an individual to walk in the door when they start to have an existential crisis about I'm not doing as well as I would like to be doing. And so let me get some help. It's not often who I see, I will say. And when I am consulting with or even supervising others that are learning kind of this modality, what I say to them is, what you want to look at is a lot of times when people walk in the door, they feel like a failure. And they feel like I have failed, which is why I'm here. Instead of viewing it as, I would love to reconceptualize. Even we talk a lot about the stigma in the field, but part of that is our own self disclosures. Part of that is what we think of when they walk in the door. So to me, it's like putting your hand out and it's saying, you know what, doesn't matter where you enter, because that right now might not be a great moment in your life, or you might feel challenged in a lot of ways, right? But I'm here to partner with you to actually help. And so within that, I think that, whether it's an educator, whether it's a therapist, because a lot of times I will work with a therapist is already there, or a family might have a team of therapists, like mama's therapist, dad's therapist, kid has therapist, but there's no quarterback. And so a lot of times what I find is that what we need to do is we need a single individual who learns to be a strategist. And that person says, okay, these are the treatment goals. I don't need to know your deep, dark business and secrets. What I do need to know is individually, where are we going with mom? Where are we going with that? As a couple, even, right? Where is this couple going? Are they going towards divorce? Are they going towards, reconciliation? So that way, when you get in with the child, what you're able to do is make sure that there are short, achievable goals where people feel successful, and all the therapists are working towards conceptually the same goals. Because parents tend to walk in and they want, I need all A's on the report card, right? Or dad walks in and says, I want to walk in and have my wife say, hi, honey, I'm home, right? And the kids are all like cute and sitting at the dinner table. But the reality of the situation is, when we have real life going on, if we are all not calibrated to the same place, because the mom therapist might be working on her launching and becoming independent and becoming an entrepreneur, right? Because she might have an empty nest coming. So we're not always talking. And one of the things I realized really very early on is we work in silos. And we work in silos on purpose. The systems are designed that way because we're high volume, and we have a short period of time. We need to see as many people as we can in order to help as many people as we can. In my practice, I'm concierge, so I'm high touch and there's high quality, but less volume. And the reason I made that decision to do that is because what I realized, for a short period of time in an intensive way, so 13 weeks is usually my goal, anywhere from 2 to 13 weeks, it is to get into a family system. And I say that acknowledging that the identified patient could be anybody, doesn't matter. Wherever the identified patient is, I believe at the core that there's a systems issue that is happening. That's how I'm doing. So get into however I can get in, however I'm invited in by the school sometimes, by workplace, grad school, wherever it is, a person's taking a medical leave, etc., to get into the system and to see what does that individual need for support. Because what I find is I can do an amazing job with one individual, but when I send them back into a family slash school slash environment neighborhood where the narrative is the same, it's like they hit a ceiling. They hit a glass ceiling and they're not able to actually thrive in a way that if I can tweak here and tweak there and tweak there, and even just do conversation with the gatekeepers, with the clinicians on board, the difference is miraculous almost. And I don't use that word lightly. I mean, people with the outcomes that I've been able to achieve are really wonderful.
Dr. Stancil, just help me that. So the model is a means of aggregating all of that so that you can then create, because that must be quite challenging, actually knowing where do I go, what information do I need, how do I compel people to lean in, all that, my old corporate world, we call that stakeholder management. How do we, so the model is a means of kind of ordering what is quite dynamic and chaotic into a structure that you can then start to work with. Is that fair?
Let's go even deeper. In a lot of ways, it's a nervous system. So creating a net around which already exists. Usually, there's a lack of ability to co-regulate. And I would say when we usually use that word, we're talking about individual to individual, right? And couples or mother-child attunement, right? I would go further and I would say that the systems also have ability to dysregulate us because this is reinforcing certain behaviors and or not. And so it is creating a net literally around the individual, the identified patient, right? Which, and the system begins with the family system. And that could mean that maybe we need to bring the nanny in and we need to have psychoeducation with the nanny. Or maybe what we need, if the driver is the person that spends the most time with this young adult, then we need to bring the driver in so that that driver can have some psychoeducation. So that way, at all these different touch points, right, we are all on the same page and we're all calibrated towards the same goals. So it's exactly what you're saying. There's strategies within the framework to help everyone get on the same page for the greater good.
Well, now I want to ask my second question, if that's all right, because you mentioned that this can also show up in the workplace. That this can also go into um, the professional sphere. And I would be curious to hear you answer the same question from the adult perspective, who is surviving and they're in need of that net building, but they're dealing with, let's say, a toxic work environment, or let's say a society where the bridge is constantly being shooken, since we're applying this to a similar parallel just at the adult level of bridge building.
Absolutely. So in this example, it's a toxic workplace, right? So we may not have the opportunity to bring anybody in because there may not be anyone that is trusted enough, right, in this system to say that we need to partner with on the therapeutic level, right? Like we were talking about the home and the school. So know that what I do is I play to people's strengths. So I find out, so for example, I had a young man that was coming to see me, who was really struggling at work, amazing company, on paper looks great. Like you're like, yay, right? And he was miserable. He had to keep the job because of the status, right? And he needed to work there. And so, I asked him to do a neuropsych at the basis to find out if there was a good, just cognitive fit for this opportunity. And of course, right, it was not, right? So forget personality, just on the basis of like cognition and the narrow domains that existed, it just wasn't a good organizational fit, right? So work at that for that individual started with acceptance of who you are. And instead of judging who you are, instead of having, be celebrating the fact that with this cognitive profile that has these deficits, you developed these superpowers that got you through university, right? And into this amazing, prestigious environment, right? Where now you kind of hit the wall because your intelligence has maxed, right? So all these little cracks of what were always there, right, are now is like proliferating. And so what is able to do is do a body of work initially to help just acceptance, of who he is, what his brain is, right? And then another body of work, personality wise, to figure out where would his personality best thrive. And there was along that way true rejection of anything other than prestige, traditional, classic, conservative kind of, and of course parents were supporting this because they didn't know any better, right? So for that, it became, why don't we identify whoever you want, mom, partner, friend, and he chose a best friend to help you to reinforce because he would get it when he was with me in session. We would talk about cognition, we would talk about personality, we would talk about fit, we would talk about vocations, and then he would walk out and go back to work. And then the world, right, would dump all this stuff. If you need to stay, you need to stay, you need to stay. So what I realized is I was like, okay, so his best friend was his roommate. I'm like, let's get the best friend in, do a little psychoeducation about like, what does he think? Can he support you in this as you explore to see what is best for you? Right. And so we did 2 sessions. I mean, not even a lot of intervention, I would say, honestly, just about, and because a best friend wants the best for their best friend, it's not about where you work and leaves and XYZ. So that shifted the needle, just that there was support, just that he could be seen, right, without performing. He could take the mask off of who he truly was and he could be accepted. And that if there was one person in this world that could do that, guess what? I was like, there's a place that can as well. And so what we did, it took 6 months, let me be upfront, which is not typically how I work. I usually work in 13-week increments. But second intervention, he started to put in applications at different places, and he was able to find a job that played to all of his strengths, to the point that where he was staying at work to 3 a.m., doing work every night and feeling like he wasn't smart and it wasn't all these things. When he got the new opportunity, it played to all of his strengths. So he was able to phone it in. We laughed about it because he could work 4 hours and get things done that other people were staying there to 2 a.m., right? And his income doubled, literally. And guess what? Parents came along the way, because as long as he was happy and as long as he was thriving, and, met a girl, got engaged, the whole nine. But if he had stayed at where he was, I would argue that, I could have did therapy about why he was where he was and all these things years, right? And he was reasonably depressed and reasonably anxious because that was what the environment was telling him. He wasn't good enough. Instead, so the deeper work, and I do believe in the deeper core kind of psychodynamic work of peeling back the onion and knowing that. I feel like there's time for that. But when we're in crisis, we're in crisis. And we got to move you. And then we can add a level of stability. Now we can take the time to pull back and know why you did what you did. Because otherwise you will recreate the same patterns. I am a believer of that. But I think we have to move you to a place where you can even see it. Otherwise, when we start talking about hope and what it can be, it's almost like we have faith that what we're saying is true because they haven't experienced it a lot of the time, and instead of doing it that way, what I do is I try to move them through intervention and strategies towards a new environmental fit, right? And then once we get there, then fall back. And I do episodes of intervention. So there are times when we focus on what's underneath the hood and why do you make these choices? And then there are other times where we're actively like, let's move. And to your point, I would say, when the government, when all these things are happening in the world where it's uneasy and chaotic, you can still thrive. I think part of that is permission to be happy while others are going through undue arrest. And so it is by not invalidating that you're going to have glimmers, you're going to experience joy as you are actively working towards making changes, that we don't have to be sad and suffer while we're out there being activists in our own ways. We all make a difference. But that it's literally a permission to enjoy your life while you're working towards the change that you want on a meta level, on a micro level as well.
Can
Because
we
I'm
give that?
listening.
Can we let that breathe though? Like, can we please give that at least 3 seconds of silence? Because that whole aspect about giving yourself permission and then accepting who you are when you are so caught up in the prestige and all of the things that are supposed to identify that you've made it, that is really profound and deep. So I just wanted to take a good breath on that. But Emma, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Would love to hear your thoughts. But yeah, I just needed to sit in that for a second before we moved on because I felt that at an intrinsic level.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of it's piqued more curiosity, to be honest, because so does the model also help you to navigate? Because it's one thing when you know who you are, but actually, as I understand that you're predominantly talking about the application of this model in education settings and with young adults who are defining their role in the context of the world that we live in right now. Does the framework, as well as organizing all of those factors that affect this nervous system, that build the picture of this nervous system and that affects the regulation or dysregulation of it, does it also help to navigate those individuals to who, because you talked about using a specific tool in that instance to help that guy really understand the disconnect between who he was and where he was.
Absolutely. Some of my, I would say, endearing work, the work that means most to my heart, has been with mothers. So I do these things. I do these retreats. Then I think they're retreats. I do these retreats out of mothers asking for them, not out of like my own kind of brainchild, to be honest with you, but mothers coming to me. What I noticed when a child has been through something, no matter what it is, and they all have difficult moments in their own ways, and if they haven't, they will, is what I always say. And when the mom is the heartbeat of the home, and she is the one that is making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. What I find is once the storm is over, a lot of times it is hard for her to recalibrate, and it's hard for her to take a deep breath. So to your point about many times I work with young adults, honestly, adolescent, I call them emerging adults where they're grown, but they're not quite grown. They don't like when I say it that way, but they're not quite independent yet. It could be emotional reasons, even though they might, have a trust or they might have a great job. But a lot of times what I find is that the mothers, when I can actually, we have joy retreats where what we do is I help them. One of the hardest things I learned was exposure to joy. And the reason that is so difficult is because when you have gone through something really difficult in your life, of course, right from a trauma lens, we're still being hypervigilant. Our brain wants to keep us alive, right? And we're looking for and we're spending more time on what's wrong instead of what's right. And so that also impacts the whole household. So when I can help in a retreat, right, an intensive, right, when I can help a mother actually regulate her nervous system to recognize and validate that the storm is actually over and that there may be a new one, but the same mom that got through what they had already gone through, right, will get through the next storm or the next mountain to climb and actually help them to co-regulate in that moment with a lot of times I'll be upfront with you, there's small retreats, but other mothers to say, you know what, we actually do have this. And you know what, that actually is over. And you know what, I can sit in this moment, even if it is my child's getting discharged from rehab, we can sit in this moment and we can focus on having my life in tandem with the fact that I am still worried about my baby, right? I can focus on the good things that are happening, that there's a discharge happening from rehab, while I also recognize that there's a word there of, are they going to have to go back? Right. But it is a recalibration of, that's why I said to me, joy is not just about, pleasure. A lot of times we talk about physically, like, and it's like, and sometimes that can be a dopamine chasing situation where an individual is chasing dopamine. Where's my next hit? Right. And happy, I find is fleeting, right? It's like, okay, we have a happy emotion, we get sad, right? Emotions like to live. We know how to feed them. But when we talk about actually sitting in peace and embracing the moment, when we talk about joy in the way that I'm describing, it is about honoring that all these things have happened. And you know what? Tolerating the bigger part of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
Model, we can apply it to where, because there's an intersectionality of where we are, all of us, and where we're going. And also honoring the fact that we have to fight for joy. We have to fight to thrive just as much as we have to fight to come out of that trauma. And everything that we put in there, we have to put in. A lot of times when people get through trauma and they stop the work, it's sad to me because what I would like to do and what I would like for individuals to do is to create a whole new skill set towards thriving and building a life that is amazing, that they could have never imagined having. And so sometimes, we stop, I would say prematurely, instead of working towards, because that is just as hard in my experience as getting through the horrific moments that trauma also brings.
Mm.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So actually the model is universally applicable. It's not, it can be applied in many different contexts.
Absolutely.
And you train in that. You train the intermediaries working.
I do. And, I, I always pause because I'm working on the book and I'm working on the manuals in my abundant spare time. Which is the goal. The goal is to get it out to the masses. Right now I'm in New York City, so many clinicians know me, and so they come to me, and I consult and train and help their clients through situations. And so, but the one to many model is something that I think is really important because what I've watched is individuals can read a book or to hear an interview, right? And have a life changing experience because sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
A lot of times we get taught, right, that like if I'm not happy, it's my fault. But we're not also given a blueprint for what do you need in order to experience joy, right? And what is the compass towards having the joy that you would like to have in your life? And so I see the model as going from, which is what I said, from trauma to thriving, because we've all experienced something in our lives that has impacted us in a way that we would have wished it did not. Like we joined a club we didn't want to join, right? Um, and I see that there's a whole nother opportunity that we often don't talk about, that we can have a therapeutic intervention with individuals to have them be so excited that they're yelling from the rooftops. They're so glad they went to therapy. And that's what I would love to see from most people.
Yeah, great. Right. The more you can socialize that work and that model, the more that can then democratize this approach to kind of reframing that. Yeah, I see it. Super. I am conscious of time, and I think that the answer to this question might be longer than we would normally have. So I'm going to ask you the question that we do ask all of our guests, which is if we've touched on it today in our conversation, but if we kind of really zoom out and look at the periphery and look at kind of the big picture, the things that bombard us, you talked about that being in a digital space and getting tied up with this expectation, but look at the climate crisis, look at the geopolitical landscape, look at that really big picture, then kind of come down to, okay, what does that mean for the country that I live in, the society that I operate within, the community that I am a part of, that community where I live, where I work, the relationships with my family and my friends, my significant other or others, my children, myself. There's many reasons for all of that to be frayed, to be fractured, to be anxiety inducing. And I guess if you had a single lever, as like Dr. Melita, give me one lever, one button for the change that we need to see against that backdrop, what would it be?
Connection. I think that when I am a true believer that when we are connected to each other and we are able to actually see each other and accept, and when I say accept, what I mean is just acknowledge the reality of the human that is in front of you, that it changes everything. Because in a situation, in a world, right, where most of us feel alone many times, when you are seen by another and you are just acknowledged, right? Just validate the valid for what exists, that in and of itself, I find can empower another individual, just to witness to the story, to be able to do phenomenal feats just by itself.
Great answer. Great answer. If we were more connected, there'd be so much greater opportunity for health and healing. It's just really, yeah, yeah.
And change as well. Because a lot of times I think it is difficult to have empathy for another perspective if you don't see the other individual. And to know how I'm impacting you, right? It is much easier to continue in the way that I'm continuing. But, one of the things that I was talking about the model is just having the school or individuals, right, around them to simply see that person, to be able to watch their story. It gives you a different level of empathy just for another human.
Yeah, and when you said to me at the start, these schools often kind of have these like, oh, that child is this, is that, shows up in that way, behaves in this way, and that kind of predominantly innocent but hand down of this blueprint that it really makes it difficult, especially for young people, to reinvent, to reframe, to go again. And that's quite, that really hit me at the start of our conversation when you talked about the kind of teacher to teacher, you know, innocent perhaps, but quite, you it frames the child in a particular way and sets them up not to be different. And the change is the only constant. It's something we come back to regularly in these conversations, is that one thing that we can all be sure about is it will change. And so to be able to change ourselves, to our circumstance, to our situation, to our view of it, to our environment, to our relationships with it and the people around it is really empowering. And I think connection's at the heart of all of that. So yeah.
I would also add to this conversation that I see what you mentioned earlier around exposure to joy, honoring that we have to fight for joy, and building a skill set towards thriving is so crucial to our ability to connect. Because I think oftentimes many people fall into the trap of thinking that their joy needs someone else
Yeah, or something, or something.
or something else, or some prestige, some level, some obtainment of some social status. And so that ability to connect and build on what you're saying by understanding that, there are aspects of your joy that, first of all, you have to be exposed to so you even know it's possible. But then this consistent understanding that your joy and your peace are often things you have to fight to protect. We all have certainly come to understand that in our understanding of trauma in our professional lives and how we're associated with this work. But I think that constant reminder that we are always building a skill set. No one ever reaches that point of, I understand everything I need to know about joy. I understand everything I need to know about thriving. I know every bridge to connection because the landscape is always shifting. There's a rupture, there's a need to repair, there's a different understanding of what joy and thriving looks like at this level. Or if you find yourself sliding down, what does it look like at this base level? So there are all these apps. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. And I said, and who's going to catch you? So part of it is building a community of individuals who actually are able to see you, right? So that could be shifting a friend group and you're within the same company, right? Or you within the same neighborhood. But within that, right, there's a smaller group of individuals that you are most connected to. And within most connected to those individuals, when you slide, right, it's like, where's your safety mechanism? Who's catching you? Do they recognize you? 100%, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, I knew you were going to be amazing. I knew this was going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, Dr. Stancil, thank you. It's been a real pleasure having you on today. Appreciate your contribution and the explanation. It's been a really insightful and interesting conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. You guys asked amazing questions that were thought provoking. So I appreciate it. And it was actually really fun. So I look forward to other opportunities and I look forward to seeing you ladies again.